Hello, I'm Jim Riley, and welcome to Salute the Vets. Today I've got a very special guest with me, Gary Flaherty. Gary, how are you?
Fine, sir. How are you?
Good. Now, you're Director of Veteran Services in Columbia County, correct?
That's correct.
But the first part of the show, we're going to talk about you. So I see the stripes. I'm terribly impressed because I know you provided great service, not only in the military, but for your country. So give us a little bit of your background, Gary.
Well, my title is Command Sergeant Major,
Okay.
which is the highest enlisted rank in the Army.
Right.
I enlisted in the Army at 17 years old out of West Virginia. My dad was a coal miner for 62 years, and he wanted me to stay and work in the coal mines, and I always wanted to be in the military. And in our town, when you get to the point of leaving school, it was almost a given that you would join the military and serve our country.
Right. That's a tradition locally. Our family had that for the boys in the family. When they graduated from high school, they would go in the military. The girls would go out and get a job. So tell us, you got out of West Virginia, you went into the Army. Tell us a little bit now how it transpired.
Well, I went into the Army in 1961. Went to basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky to be
Right.
a tanker.
Uh-huh.
And from there I went to California, where we did desert training. And my first overseas assignment was in Bamberg, Germany as a cavalry scout.
Right.
And we patrolled the Russian-Czechoslovakian border.
Right, that's right. That was still very active at that time.
Oh, yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
And later on, we had the wall come down and rest, but at that time, that was still very active, very serious business. How long did you stay there?
I was in Germany for 3 years. Once I completed my tour in Germany, I was reassigned to Fort Benning, Georgia.
Okay.
And I was only at Fort Benning a short time when the Gulf of Tonkin happened.
Right.
And very quickly, I got orders to fill a unit that was a combat engineer unit.
Right.
Up at Fort Dix, New Jersey. And our whole battalion then left out of Fort Dix and went to Vietnam.
Right, because Gulf of Tonkin, just to help people historically, that was the big motivator in increasing our entrance into that war footing in Vietnam.
And as you know, when McNamara wrote his book, he admitted that their Gulf of Tonkin was a hoax.
Right, just a justification. We'll use that term, justification.
Yeah, that's better, yes.
Yeah, sounds a little better. But the fact of the matter is, that's quite a thing to be faced with. So tell us a little bit about that experience.
So when I got to Vietnam, I put in to be a door gunner on a helicopter. And the colonel called me in one day and said, "You're a tiny guy, I weighed about 117.
Right.
And we're putting together a new organization, and you're small enough to be that," and that was we were called tunnel rats.
That's right. All through Vietnam and that area, they had these tunnels, and that's how the enemy at that time, who were the North Vietnamese, would work through these tunnels. So you had to go in and explore and chase down and be active. That must have been a terrifying experience.
Well, it was, because oftentimes we would crawl on our belly through a hole and that's why you found out very quickly why they wanted small guys.
Right.
With a flashlight and a .45. But most people don't know that some of the tunnels over there were bigger than the city of Albany, and they were built in 3 layers. And when you got down to the bottom layer, they had hospitals, command and control centers, and ammunition factories down there.
So they were conducting the war underground.
Right.
In many ways, yeah.
And they would come up and hit us. And I went over in '65, so it was early in the war, and the units coming in didn't realize what was going on until we finally found that they were going in holes, and then the locals that were sympathetic to the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese would let them go in a tunnel, and then they'd put a fireplace over it,
right,
like they were cooking a meal.
Right.
So we had to search and destroy those.
Right. Now, I was telling you before we went on the air that I served about the same time. I got out in '65, and that's when things really started increasing and heating up. Wasn't it '65?
It was a big buildup, started in '65, right.
So you did that over that 3-year period?
Yes.
And it was all tunnel work?
Well, I also did, when I wasn't called in for a tunnel operation, I would do convoy escorts,
Okay.
and night patrols into the jungles.
So it was an active infantry type of work.
Yeah, except I was a combat engineer.
Right. It's great. You get the title, but you still got to go out and do the fighting, of course.
And we didn't get the CIB.
No. Now, you were there 3 years.
Yes, sir.
You got back. What was some of the ramifications for you physically, emotionally, and must have been a trying experience for you?
In fact, I was just telling a friend of mine, that's a captain in the sheriff's department, that when we came home, I felt that the American people were as much of an enemy as the Viet Cong were.
Right.
We came in, I flew into Travis Air Force Base.
Now that's California?
In California,
Yeah.
yes, sir. And then from Travis, they bussed us over to Oakland Army Terminal, where we got our next assignment.
Right.
And the students from Berkeley campus would line up along the streets we were going through and throw rocks through the windows at our buses.
They were one of the most radical campuses at that time.
That's
Berkeley.
correct.
Yeah, that was one of the really strong opposition campuses to the war in Vietnam.
Yes, sir.
It went across the country, but Berkeley was the real hotspot. So it had to be very, very troubling for you. You put your life at risk. You're doing what you know is right, that you have to do to serve the country, and then you were not welcomed to home. It had to be very devastating.
And it took a toll on all of us. And the commitment we made at that time was we'd never let another generation be treated like us.
Right. And we'll talk later about the business that you're in. What about the effects of the war itself on you?
Well, to kind of finish it up, I decided to stay in the military as a career.
Right.
And
now, that's something that evolved after that experience, or you kind of think you were looking at that all along?
Well, when I was in Germany, I decided I wanted to stay in the military.
Right. You kind of saw that's where your future would be, and that's where you could make your mark on the world.
Right.
Okay. So at this time in California, you decided to stay in and re-up, and then what took place?
Well, then they reassigned me as an Army recruiter in Plattsburgh, New York. And
the frozen north, the great frozen north of Plattsburgh, New York.
But I loved it. And one of the things that was exciting, and a lot of people don't know, is we had the protesters leaving the country so they wouldn't have to go to Vietnam.
Right.
I would go in on a Monday, open up my office at the Federal Building, and the office would have lines of Canadians waiting to join the military. And we had an arrangement at that time with the embassy that if I sent a Canadian to take his test and physical, he passed it, the embassy would give him a green card in 3 days. And then they joined the Army. And all they wanted to do was be in airborne infantry and go to Vietnam.
Yeah. So they really had a belief that this was something that they needed to serve.
Right.
Yeah. Now, how long did you do that up in Plattsburgh?
I did 3 years in Plattsburgh. And I also went down to Kingston and did another tour on recruiting duty.
Okay. And so as you went along in your career, did you stay in recruitment?
No, I ended up going to Korea.
Right.
And in Korea, I ran patrols on the DMZ.
Right.
I also ran a compound for training and non-commissioned officers.
Okay.
And I did both Korean and American soldiers.
Right, that's right, because South Korea had, their military was a big part of that experience along the DMZ. That's still active today, along the DMZ?
Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah, yeah.
In fact, I was just on Saturday, the judge was, Judge Nichols was giving a speech on the Korean War, the anniversary of the armistice.
Oh, okay. And this is Jonathan Nichols, Columbia County Justice, yeah?
It was 60 years Saturday that the armistice was signed.
Amazing.
But when I was in Korea, we still had firefights with the North Koreans trying to infiltrate South.
Right.
And then recently, I'm sure you probably know that the incidents that were going on in Korea, they've now canceled the armistice, so we're technically back at a state of war with North Korea.
Yeah, that's never a good thing to hear and disturbing, but that's why I think when you see a commitment that you made, it's why we need that love and support through the military to support the country. I think it's terribly important.
I totally agree.
Now, give us a little background with the medals. We don't want to do too much, but you're wearing quite a bit of stuff here. Give us just a little overview.
Well, the top medal is the Legion of Merit. I was given that by the commanding general of 8th Army in Korea, and he also commanded the UN forces. And the reason I got it was that I had turned my unit into the best combat-ready unit in the military. So he flew in one day. I was getting ready to leave Korea, and surprised me and awarded me the Legion of Merit, which is the 5th highest medal.
Yeah.
In the
Now,
Army
again,
Cemetery.
you don't do it for that reason, but it's wonderful to be recognized and have your work appreciated.
Right.
Terribly important.
And then the other most significant, of course, I have the Bronze Star from
Right.
Vietnam, but the red, white, and blue one is the Soldier's Medal. And that's the highest award you can get without engaging an enemy for heroism. And what had happened was I was on staff duty one night, and a young soldier had just come back from being in the jungles for a couple of weeks and got drunk, set up a machine gun, and was threatening to fire on our tents where we had sleeping troops. And what I decided to do was I tried to talk him down, and he refused. He finally loaded the machine gun and said he was going to kill me. But I charged him, took the gun away from him, and saved the troops. So again, it was a surprise. One day the general came into the compound when I was back in the rear and awarded me the Soldier's Medal.
It's really amazing that you can cope with a situation like that. I think part of it is training. We have to give some credit to the military in general for training. But the other is you never know who you're going to be until that moment happens, correct?
And you don't think about it. You know?
Right.
You don't say, gee, I'm going to put myself in
Right.
line
Harm's
of fire.
way, yeah, and take care of it. But
And the sad part of it in this incident was they had called the MPs. The MPs came and said, you get out there and do whatever you want to do. And they said, we'll shoot him if we have to. I said, no, you're not going to shoot him. He needs help.
right.
And as soon as I had taken a weapon from him, they then rushed him and started putting him in handcuffs and beating on him. And I went to his defense and got him into mental health treatment.
Right. Terribly important. I think we'll stop there because that's going to lead us into our discussion in the second part of the program. Again, Gary Flaherty, your title again, not the director one, the Army one.
Command Sergeant Major.
We appreciate you being with us today. We'll be right back after a few messages.
I remember the moment clearly,
I'll never forget that moment.
as long as I live.
I realized at that moment, when we first saw the damage, these people really needed us. And I was going to make a difference, right here in my community. Together with local responders, we cleared trees and collapsed walls. We had to get to the family trapped beneath. As a citizen soldier, I made a difference.
Be there for your community at NationalGuard.com.
Welcome back. Again, Gary Flaherty, thanks so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, and
Now-
thank you.
Oh, well, we just love being in your company, and we appreciate your service to the nation, and we appreciate you joining us today. Again, one last time, your title, military title.
Command Sergeant Major, U.S. Army.
And again, your story was fascinating. Thank you for sharing that with us. We're going to put another hat on you now so that people understand where you're at today and what you want to provide in service to the nation, and that is serving veterans. You are the Director of Veteran Services in Columbia County, correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
Okay. How long have you been there?
About 4 years.
Okay.
But before that, I was a town supervisor, and I did this on the side to help the county.
Right. So you kind of were moving in that direction. Now it's official and you're in that seat. Now, based on your military experience, which was extensive, but also in a war footing, and that creates tremendous problems for the individuals who serve. You know it well. What are some of the things that you like to do out of your office to support the veterans that are coming back?
Well, the most important thing is when I went down and took over the office, it was more of a walk-in. If you needed services, you walked in the office and asked for them.
So you had to be aware of the fact that it was there. you had to be aware of the fact that they wanted to serve you, and 3, you had to be aware of the fact that you were entitled to services. That isn't always the case with these veterans, is it?
No, and I started a program on outreach to go and reach out to these new veterans coming home, using my own background to establish rapport and make sure they got services they needed, to include the compensation, treatment at the VA. And I've registered probably hundreds of veterans now that go up to the VA for treatment. We also provide transportation every day, back and forth to the VA.
Great.
My van driver takes them up, he stays to the last appointment, and then we reverse and bring them home.
Right. Now, again, I'm emphasizing this because I know I benefited from the GI Bill, and I was able to go to college and change my life with it. But I had somebody direct me and move me over to your office. By you doing outreach, you make sure that bridge is solid, and they're going to be able to get in and get those services.
Right, and I get referrals from everybody. If I get referrals from the judges, I get referrals from families, I get referrals from the individual will hear about me and call. I keep my cell phone on 24 hours a day and with me wherever I am. I get calls sometimes at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And normally those calls are veterans who say, gee, Sergeant Major, I need help bad.
Right.
And I'll go out and get them and take them to the VA for treatment.
And you know, that's, when you look at your title, Command Sergeant Major, it never goes away, does it?
No, and I tell a lot of people, I took care of my troops when I was in the military. Now I feel I have an obligation to take care of our veterans.
Right, and that's part of what being a hero is, and I don't want to use that term lightly, but that's the way I view you, as a hero. Tell us about some specific programs.
Well, one of the big programs we have is a program called Stand Down, which we do once a year up in Albany, and we take homeless or people who are nearly homeless, and we set up an operation with the Elks Club up there and provide them all the veterans services that they would get at the VA hospital.
Right.
They get their flu shot for the winter. They even get haircuts. And we give them breakfast, lunch, and then we take them into this long building, and they go around, and we get imported from Pennsylvania surplus equipment for the military, brand new.
Right.
And they can fill up their bags and
Right.
take it home. The other big program we have is working with the VA is substance abuse,
Right.
and post-traumatic stress syndrome.
I was going to say that is a key element of any war footing for the veteran coming back, is a post-traumatic shock. You say it, because I'm
Post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Right.
And these kids today, they're being diagnosed with both PTSD
Right.
and traumatic brain injuries.
Right.
Because of the roadside bombs over there.
Right.
Kind of rattle their brain.
Now, having said that, this stand-down program, again, it seems similar to your whole philosophy of outreach, where you're making sure that it's easy for a veteran to get the service that he needs because of the service he provided the nation. That's your basic philosophy?
Correct. And a few years ago, I found out that there was a massive computer at the headquarters of Veterans Administration in Washington. And even the VA didn't know it. I told the director at the VA about this program. In fact, I just sent the paperwork off this week to get a list of everybody who's discharged within the last 12 months.
Right.
And I send them a letter.
Right.
Saying, I'm here for you, here's my email, here's my cell phone, here's my office address, and if you need me, contact me and I'll either meet you or you can come in and we'll meet.
Right. I really feel that that's a terribly important position to take, to be proactive and do outreach, because so many times the services are there, they're available. If you don't know, you're never going to be able to plug in and have the benefit of those programs. You did mention one before we went on the air about a justice program. Do you want to talk a little bit about that one?
Yeah, this is a program that began with myself and Judge Nichols.
Again, Jonathan Nichols, who's a Columbia County
correct
judge.
And what it is it's a program that I go and mentor the veteran. if they're coming out of jail and going to the court.
If they've had difficulties or challenges of some
Right.
type.
But I've gone beyond that and went out and met with all the local justices.
Right.
And I get calls from the local justices saying, I have a veteran standing in front of me, he really needs help.
Right.
And I don't want to put him in jail, I want him to get treatment.
Right.
And we get him into a treatment program rather than incarceration.
I just think it's so wonderful that the justices in both counties have seen fit to join you in that effort to provide services. That's a wonderful thing to hear.
Even Dutchess County, they read an article, the judge down there, Judge Clark,
Right.
in Tivoli, read an article in the paper about me, and he called me up and said, I have a veteran that really needs help. Can you come and be in court with him? Which I did for over a year.
Right.
And we got him, he had severe PTSD and
Right.
traumatic brain injury. Did 2 tours in Iraq.
Right.
And the judge told me the first time I went to court, he said, you and I were in Vietnam at the same time.
Yeah.
And I said, well, Judge, you know so much about me. What did you do in Vietnam? And he said, I was a vice admiral.
A slight bit of difference in the footing. But isn't that true that when veterans recognize veterans, a lot of very positive things happen?
Well, and I think that's the reason I connect so quickly with a veteran. I meet a veteran that needs help, and they ask me 3 questions. Did you serve in the military? Did you see combat? And did you have any effects of it?
Yeah.
And I personally was in VA counseling for 16 years on post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Right.
So I use that to now connect with a veteran, because I think the young veterans coming home today are having, mentally and physically, are having more problems than we had after Vietnam because of the back-to-back tours.
Right.
Some of them get home and they're home less than a year and they're back over in Iraq or Afghanistan.
It's hard to imagine somebody going through that experience thinking it's over and then having to go back again. It's got to be terrible for them.
And as you know, when you and I were in, the reserves and National Guard would come for their summer training.
Right.
In those days, we always called them weekend warriors. And,
that's right.
But today, we couldn't survive in the military without the reserve and guard.
No, they're basically a big part of the standing army.
Right.
Yeah. Now, let's get back to the whole outreach. As we look at your office and you as a director, and if there's any other programs you want to talk about, we want to hear about that. Talk about that whole commitment that you've made to outreach and what effects you think it's having.
I think it's having a positive effect. I have other counties calling me. I have the state call me. The veterans call me. Veterans Administration calls me all the time saying, you got a great program. Can you share it with us? And I'm fortunately for the support I get from the county chairman of the board, he allows me to go to other counties and help them with their programs.
Yeah, I don't think people understand that Veteran Services does not stop at the county line. We're talking about a need for service all over this country, and we have to do whatever we need to do.
And I have last week I got a very satisfying call from a young man in Massachusetts, in Springfield area. A friend of his had contacted me 2 years ago and said that he was in the hospital in Boston for research, that he came home from Iraq after a second time and a parasite had gotten into his body and his skin turned black and was peeling off. And I helped him put his case into the VA, and the VA has got a backlog. It's hundreds of thousands.
Wow.
And it took him until last week, and I had to get the congressman over there involved to help me.
Right.
As Congressman Gibson's a big help to me in Columbia County.
Right.
Last week he called me up and he said, you won't believe it. He said, the VA called me this morning, and because of your input, they're now going to give me $7,600 a month.
Wonderful.
And a back pay of $107,000.
Wonderful.
And he had a baby and a new wife. So.
And again, we don't do it for that reason,
No.
but it's wonderful to hear that our efforts make a difference in these veterans' lives.
And that's what keeps me going.
Yeah.
You know, I tell people that until I take my last breath or I'm not physically capable, I'm going to be there for the vet.
Gary, thank you so much. Gary Flaherty, Command Sergeant Major, Director of Veteran Services in Columbia County. Thank you so much for your service to the nation and for joining us today. We appreciate it very much.
Is there one other thing I could say?
We're never going off the air until you're completely finished.
Well, last Saturday, I was invited to a program for the second time in Austerlitz, where there's 2 chefs in Austerlitz who have a program they started called Vets to Chef. And both of them were trained in Paris. And they now take in 8 veterans at a time and train them to be professional chefs. And
that's wonderful.
Part of their graduation is they invite people like me, and they have to serve an 8-course meal. And that's
their kind of their graduation, or their what we call it, their thesis, if you will.
Right.
Yeah, the final product.
And the first one I went to was there was a Navy female there who had been injured in Iraq, and spinal injury.
Right.
And we told her that she could sit down for the graduation ceremony, and she insisted on standing up even though tears were running down from pain.
Right.
So I had great admiration for that.
The only thing I would ask, Gary, is that next time they have the graduation, I'm invited to the dinner.
Okay. It's great stuff. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Gary, so much. Command Sergeant Major Gary Flaherty, Director of Veteran Services in Columbia County, we thank you so much for your service and for being with us today.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And we also want to thank you for joining us on Salute the Vets. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Welcome to Smart Home from Mid-Hudson Cable, a monitoring solution that brings the power of video to protect your family and home. Using cameras installed by Mid-Hudson Cable technicians, you can check in on your pets, be notified when your children get home, or look in on the nanny. For businesses, a visible camera can reduce crime and help employees and customers feel safer at night. Call today to learn how Smart Home can help you.